My name is Helena Kennedy, and I'm a member of Doughty Street Chambers. It's my great privilege and honour to welcome you to this webinar. I'm also the director of the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, where we have a global media freedom project with a high-level legal panel that is looking at the terrible, terrible price that is being paid by journalists in trying to inform the world about current affairs, what happens in war zones, about conflicts, about corruption, and so on. And we should all be mindful of the vital importance of information and news in our world. There cannot be law and the protection of rights without good information coming from good journalists. And good journalists, unfortunately, are paying the price. There's been a great increase in the deaths of journalists over the last 14 years. And it should be a source of alarm to all of us. This discussion today is really to remind us of the death of a wonderful photojournalist and indeed of another very fine journalist whose families are here and who are going to address you about the importance of securing justice. But it really stems from the campaign to secure justice for Anton Hammerl, who's a really remarkable photojournalist who was murdered 14 years ago, and 10 years ago, sorry. And his family are in attendance here today, many of his friends and associates from South Africa. There's going to be many tuning in from the United States of America because Diane Foley, the mother of James Foley, who is a journalist who was murdered in different circumstances, but who is also a great voice for the importance of us in securing justice and protections for journalists as they do their important work. So I'm going to start by saying to everyone, there's a Q&A opportunity and do send in questions. And there's, of course, a chat on the side. But I'm going to introduce you, first of all, by having a short video shown to you, which was produced by the family of Anton Hammerl. And then I'm going to introduce you to his widow, who will talk about their experience, their loss, and their efforts to secure justice. Ray. I'm hoping that video might come on.
My name is James Foley. I'm 38 years old. I'm a freelancer, a writer, and videographer. Last year I was captured in Libya for 44 days, and I was with Anton Hammerl when he was killed that day. I only knew Anton for 5 days. He was this kind of guy who had a light inside of him that really brought people to them. He was humble and open, and we started to work together a little bit. That morning, it was myself, Claire Gillis, Manu Bravo, and Anton Hammerl. And we were ambushed just outside of Brega by 2 Gaddafi vehicles, probably about 10 soldiers, just like firing. He was killed immediately when we were ambushed. And it was that unforgettable, horrible feeling of not being able to help him and not being able to go back for him because we were captured. Also, the decision we had to make to not tell any Libyan authorities that we were witness to this war crime, because we all felt that that would put our own eventual freedom in jeopardy. Penny was led to believe that he was alive despite increasing evidence that something was very wrong. But right away, within the first couple of days, Penny had an idea that something was wrong. 2 weeks later, when we could all call home, and Anton didn't call home, of course, she knew she must have known something was very wrong. She tried as much as she could to find out what was going on, and several times the regime told her, he's alive, we know he's alive. We were ambushed, and Anton was killed on April 5th, 2011, and we weren't released until May 19th, and that's when we told Penny that he was in fact killed immediately, and that was it. I mean, that was probably the hardest part.
April the 5th, 10 years ago, so almost exactly an anniversary of real importance. And these images that you've just seen were from the archive of Anton's work, and as you will have seen, many of them were from other places, and particularly from Africa, from South Africa. Anton Hammerl was born in South Africa, is a South African, but also has dual citizenship, and was very much from an Austrian family. So he was Austrian South African, and proudly committed to his role of letting the world see what was happening in different parts of the world, and to witness man's inhumanity to man. And Penny, his widow, is here to speak about him. He was covering the Libyan civil war. He was there. He was assassinated really by Gaddafi's troops, who were loyal to Gaddafi. And Penny herself will tell you how she was lied to about the circumstances. Penny, you've been a really great voice for Anton, and we'd like to hear from you now.
Thanks so much, Helena. Yes, for sure. It's been 10 very, very difficult years for our family. Every single one of us has gone through trauma associated with losing a loved one in such a terrible and violent way, and learning of it all and bearing the grief in a rather extraordinary public context. Our wound was public because it was shared by everyone who knew Anton, and even those who did not. They came to our aid and came to send us words of kindness and affection. We've shared that pain with everyone that stood with us then, when the devastating news landed. And that same community of family and friends and journalists now stands with us today again. And I'm so grateful for that. It's because of that support, that we feel stronger now to step up and to step out and renew our search for answers. We are starting this effort because that is the core of it. We need to know the truth of what really happened in the events leading up to Anton's death and thereafter. It's difficult to really explain totally the trauma and grief. Much of it is ongoing. Yes, we've had to learn to live with the fact that Anton died. We've had to accept that. But the trauma for the family is not only losing Anton, but not knowing what happened to him or where his remains are. Without knowing, the family just hasn't been able to properly mourn. It's very difficult to explain to a young child growing up without their father where he is or why we have no grave to visit. You know, the 44 days in which we were led to believe Anton was alive, it was like sleepwalking through a nightmare that just wouldn't end. We didn't have the level of support that a family ought to have in those circumstances. If anything, we were misled cruelly. And unsurprising though, like in so many situations and in matters before us, it was the journalist community, then based in Libya, covering the uprising, that mobilized and became our lifeline for updates as to developments and briefings from the government officials and authorities. There was heavy reliance on the journalists in the period following James and Claire and Mano's release to get information as to exactly what was going on the ground. Now, this is information that you expect to be provided with by the local authorities or public bodies or governments, and yet it's down to the journalists to investigate these things, often at personal risk. Now, we're so honored to have Diane here today to support us. Diane Foley has just been tremendous in her support for us through these years. James was a support then in the aftermath of Anton's disappearance. He and Claire were among the journalists who even returned to Libya to try and help us to pick up a trail again as to Anton's remains. You know, they shouldn't have had to do this. The various states involved in Anton's case, they're all signatories to global humanitarian rules that place responsibilities on them to hold inquiries in circumstances such as ours. They've signed up to international treaties, and that means they're obligated to investigate when a person has been killed or disappeared. Now, we've never had any proper investigation. No government has seen fit to help and aid our search, a search which, frankly, cannot be done by a family so removed from the scene and the situation where it all happened, and certainly without the resource and the specialist skills needed to launch such an investigation. The states involved, though, have always had access to these legal mechanisms and resources. Sadly, we've been let down. We're not the first family this has happened to. I fear we will not be the last. So my hope and wish today is that through this campaign, we will ensure that these cases are taken seriously and properly investigated. It's been 10 years since Anton was killed in Libya. There should have been an inquiry by now. We should not be having this conversation at all. But instead, we're here again. We're calling for justice. We're calling on the states involved to consider this matter and seriously consider the injustice of an ongoing violation of our right as a family to know what's happened to Anton. The truth matters, family matters. We need to know what happened. And it's back to you, Helena.
Penny, thank you. And you yourself, as someone who is a journalist, you know what the protections in international law ought to be and what should have taken place. And you now have a legal team, and I'm going to now move to Keelan Gallagher, Queen's Counsel, who leads a legal team with Tatiana Eatwell and Catherine Meredith that are currently looking at the case and looking at the legal steps that can be taken and the human rights violations that were inevitably at the heart of this. So Keelan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Helena. And it's wonderful that we've so many people joining us from around the world today to show solidarity and support to Penny, and indeed including Diane. We're so grateful for Diane's support, who's been through this horrific experience herself. So many of you will know the headline statistic that 9 out of 10 cases of journalist deaths, the killers go unpunished. And that's a statistic which we often hear. We hear it on repeatedly when it is International Day to End Crimes for Impunity Against Journalists on World Press Freedom Day. We see it in UNESCO reports year on year. But behind those statistics lie multiple stories, like the story you've just heard from Penny about Anton, a very special, brilliant, talented photographer and photojournalist. You heard James Foley describing him as a guy who had a light inside of him. And you've seen some of his incredibly powerful, iconic images. And it seems to us that Anton was a courageous, brilliant journalist who entered Libya at a time when Gaddafi's forces were suspected of committing serious violations of international humanitarian law, including war crimes and crimes against humanity. And he was performing a public service, attempting to shine a light on those suspected violations, to bring accurate accounts of what was happening in Libya in 2011 to the world's attention. And in fact, what happened to him and the 3 journalists who he was with that day on the 5th of April is that they themselves became victims of those atrocities. And Anton was killed. And Anton was, in the words of his death certificate, murdered. And that is a conclusion with which we very much agree from the material that we've seen. Now, journalists, of course, play a hugely important role in bearing witness to armed conflict. And in doing so, they both exercise their own right to freedom of expression and they perform a vital public service. And that is what Anton was doing at that time. And the death and disappearance of a journalist in these circumstances is a matter of very grave concern and calls for investigation. Now, Helena, our chair, speaking in November at an event, said for too long, impunity for such crimes has been perceived as insurmountable, and the international community has only offered empty expressions of condemnation. And that chimes very much with Penny's experience over the past 10 years, because despite there being very clear international law obligations on Libya, Penny has had, and her family have had, 10 years of no action, no answers, and no accountability. And even the most basic thing which a bereaved family need, a return of remains in order to have a place to grieve, just that basic human need, has not been satisfied. So the stage that we're at, I wanted to update you on the stage that we're at from what we've seen. We've examined the available material, the publicly available material, and other material which Penny and many investigative journalists and supporters of the family have gathered. And from reviewing that material, our view at this stage is that there are reasonable grounds to suspect that Anton was the subject of a direct and unlawful attack, contrary to Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions and customary international humanitarian law, and that his killing constitutes the war crimes of murder and unlawful killing of a civilian. So from the material we've seen, it is clear that Anton and the other journalists he was with, James Foley, Claire Gillis, and Manu Bravo, were directly targeted, despite being civilians, despite being identifiable as civilians, a number of them carrying equipment. Even when indicating that they were journalists, the direct shooting continued. And of course, we know that 3 of the journalists were then abducted and kidnapped and held for 44 days, which also fits with the suggestion that this is not crossfire, not a mistake, but deliberate targeting of 4 journalists, resulting in Anton losing his life. So that's the first aspect. But the second very important aspect is that we have also seen from the material in front of us that Mr. Hammerl's killing and the continued failure to investigate the circumstances surrounding his killing on the 5th of April constitute a violation of the right to life. And the investigative duty has been violated and continues to be violated. And also critically, it appears in the material we have seen that there were efforts made to conceal the truth of what happened on the 5th of April 2011. And Penny has described in very powerful detail the right of a bereaved family member, including Penny and many others who are on this call, to know the fate of their loved ones. And that is a fundamental right in international law. And Penny continues to be deprived of that. Anton's other family members, those who loved him, continue to be deprived of that right. And so today, we have taken action to start the first most basic step, which Penny needs. Should have happened many years ago, but 10 years on, it's happening now. We have complained today and filed complaints with the UN special procedures, calling for an investigation into Anton's murder and the aftermath, the circumstances afterwards from 2011 to the present day. So we filed, first of all, a petition with the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, Irene Khan. Secondly, a petition with the new UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Summary or Arbitrary Executions, Dr. Maurice Tidball-Binns. And we've also made a complaint to the UN Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances, because what happened on the 5th of April was an attempted abduction of 4 people, which resulted in an abduction of 3 and the murder of 1, Anton Hammerl. And we have requested that the UN now fill the gap. We have a situation where Libya, despite having a clear obligation under international law to conduct an investigation and to put an end to the climate of impunity in respect of Anton's killing, has failed to do so. They've had 10 years to do it. They have not done it. And in those circumstances, we say the UN must step up to the plate and must take action where Libya has failed to act. And we call on those of you who are here today from governments. We've seen many of you are joining us from embassies, including indeed some of the countries very relevant here, including some of you from the Austrian embassy, I know. And we call on governments to support Penny and the family in their campaign for justice, and to support the request that the UN must now ensure that there is an investigation. Libya must be held to account. Libya must provide key information to the UN and to the family. And may I say I know many of you who are here today have experienced directly as war correspondents, as photojournalists in conflict zones, or working with people who are journalists working in conflict zones. And we're conscious that often you see a collective shrug of the shoulders and an assumption that it's all too difficult. So this is a circumstance in which we have good reason to believe that there are leads which can be followed up. And we wanted to just give you an indication of that. So in 2012, a year after Anton's murder, Penny was contacted and she was informed when she was contacted that there had been discovery of remains which may fit Anton's profile. So there was a mass grave discovered in Libya with 170 bodies. It was understood that one of the bodies may be Anton's. We were told that it fitted the profile in terms of his height, his hair color, and his race, and so on. And Penny was led to believe in May 2012 that a DNA sample would be taken and checked in relation to that body. And astonishingly, the trail has gone entirely cold since the 30th of May 2012. So here we are 9 years later, and Penny has never been given an explanation about what happened there. Now, some of you will know that in the last 4 weeks, there has been in Libya a finding and an identification of 4 Filipino nationals who were killed in 2015 by Daesh. And they've been identified in a graveyard. There have been many examples in Libya in recent years of the dead being identified months and years later. And it seems to us that there is an obvious trail in 2012 from the material we've seen, which simply wasn't fully followed up and hasn't been fully pursued. So this is not a hopeless case by any means in terms of identifying Anton's remains. There is good material before us to indicate that in fact Anton's remains may be able to be traced and returned here. And critically, in England, Penny is, of course, a Londoner based in London with her family. Anton was a Londoner too. I'm also someone who lives in London, but I'm not a British national and a foreigner in a strange land, as I think many of us may feel. But I've lived here for 20 years. And it may horrify many of you to know that if you have a situation where someone dies abroad in this way, despite being a UK resident, being based in London, key to getting an investigation is the body being returned. If the body were returned, Penny would have an automatic entitlement to a coroner's inquest. But because Anton's remains have not been identified, she doesn't get that basic entitlement. That basic entitlement to an inquest is not triggered. So that's another part of this process which we need to bear in mind. So today, what we are asking people to do is to support Penny's campaign for justice for Anton. Those of you who are from civil society or journalists or activists, we ask you to shout from the rooftops to tell Anton's story, which has been forgotten for 10 years. Those of you who are diplomats or politicians who are joining us today, we ask that you support the campaign and do everything you can in your power to ensure that governments or others who have relevant information provided to us and provided to the UN special procedures, and also that you exercise your leverage in your bilateral relations with Libya and in your engagement with the UN special procedures to press for the long-awaited investigation to now take place so that Penny and her family are not left with no answers, no action, and no accountability. This has got to change. Thank you.
Keelan, thank you so much for that, and so helpfully telling everyone who's listening that there are things that we can do, that this is about more than receiving information, that actually it's a call to action, and that there are things that all of us who are listening can do to help Penny in her pursuit of justice. Now, it is an enormous privilege for me to introduce Diane Foley. Diane Foley was a mother of 5, and one of her children, James Foley, was the journalist whom you heard speaking in that first little video, which showed Anton's beautiful, penetrating and powerful work, but also spoke about being with Anton when Anton was shot. James himself met a horrible end in cruel and terrible and a terrible way 4 years later. And Diane who was a community health nurse and who has been a family nurse practitioner for 18 years of her life, is now the president of a foundation set up in memory of James. But really, again, arguing for justice, arguing for his legacy to be that journalists are protected and that there isn't impunity for those who commit these terrible crimes. And the failure of our systems and our international systems to address these horrifying crimes. And so it's my privilege to introduce you all to Diane Foley, who's been a voice for justice for all these years. Diane, over to you.
You're so kind. I am truly honored to join you today to advocate for justice for Anton Hammerl. Our son James Foley was with Anton the day that he was murdered in northern Libya. Anton, the talented South African Austrian photographer, James and Claire, two American conflict journalists, and the Spanish journalist Manu Rebo, were all in Libya to report on the emerging Arab Spring in 2011. Though Jim had met Anton only 5 days earlier, he was touched by his loving conversations online with family and with his firm resolve to discover the ground truth occurring in Libya. The four had carefully planned their morning trip to the front line, determined to bring us breaking news via Anton's brilliant photography and their own reporting. If Jim had not been kidnapped and publicly murdered in 2014, he would be leading this fight with Penny. Anton and Jim both believe strongly in the importance of frontline independent journalism. They were willing to risk their lives while covering armed conflict to ensure that we, the world, would receive reliable, actionable information and to document possible war crimes and other atrocities. They displayed the moral courage of true journalism to dare to speak the truth they witnessed and share it with us, no matter the personal consequences to themselves. They were devoted to the often unappreciated public service that journalism plays in protecting our freedoms. I myself was totally ignorant of the risks that freelance photographers and journalists take to uncover the truth of an issue or an occurrence. They often work in very dangerous situations without security backup, limited or medical insurance, often with bare bones safety equipment, and limited funds for safe travel, accommodations, and fixers in country. All these factors make them particularly vulnerable when covering international and domestic conflicts. And due to their inherent vulnerability, freelancers are more often directly targeted, both online and in person. And they and their families often have little recourse should a kidnapping, severe injury, or murder occur while working abroad. Our Jim was haunted by Anton's tragic death. He knew they had taken a calculated risk to travel to the front line that morning. And he felt powerless to help Anton when he was fatally shot, and frustrated by his inability to immediately inform his widow, Penny, due to their own arrest by Gaddafi forces. Jim was passionate about connecting with Penny as soon as he was released, and on doing all he could do to fight for justice for Anton and his family. Impunity for Anton was totally unacceptable to him. The tragic losses of Anton, our Jim, and countless other intrepid journalists inspired the founding of the James W. Foley Legacy Foundation, to advocate for the return of all U.S. persons held hostage abroad, for accountability for human rights crimes, and to promote journalist safety. The Foley Foundation also seeks to inspire moral courage one person at a time. So I call on all you good people listening today to summon the moral courage to join us in this fight for justice for Anton Hammerl and his family. Our voices calling for accountability together are much stronger and critical to deterring this continued violence against the very people risking their lives to bring us the truth. Thank you.
And Diane, thank you. Just listening to both yourself and to Penny, turning so much pain into something energetic to secure justice, which you know will have consequences for others. That is an incredible legacy, but the starting point has to be to try to secure justice in relation to those you've lost. It's wonderful that you've participated with us today, Diane. Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker, who's Rebecca Vincent, who's the Director of International Campaigns for Reporters Sans Frontières. Rebecca has been really running with this, and is one of the main things at the center of our work is about the way in which there is impunity for those who are responsible for crimes against journalists. And she sees it as really imperative that states are, do take action, and that other states outside of the zones of conflict have responsibilities here too, to call upon, in this case, Libya, to comply with its international obligations. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you, Helena. And it's very humbling, I might add, to speak after those powerful words from Diane and after we've heard from Penny earlier. It really is people like Diane and Penny and their wonderful families that are why we do what we do in seeking justice in so many cases around the world. It is really an incredibly sad moment to reach now a full 10 years with few answers and no accountability for such a horrific crime. Reporters Without Borders supported Anton's family in the immediate aftermath of his killing, and we stand in full solidarity with them now as they launch this campaign for justice. It takes incredible courage and tenacity to speak out in the way that Penny is doing today. She has our full support, and I hope that she'll have yours too. As others have said, no family should have to endure what Anton's family have been through over the past decade. Our institutions should work in the first instance. It should not be left to grieving families to have to prod their own governments along and to hold them to account, to in turn hold other authorities to account for incidents like what happened to Anton. No one should have to enlist the help of a world-class legal team and an international campaigning organization to stand any chance of obtaining a meaningful international response. The killing of a journalist in the line of duty should be such a shocking aberration that action is immediately taken to ensure a robust investigation is carried out and the perpetrators brought to justice. Unfortunately, however, killings of journalists happen far too regularly. Over the past 10 years, since 2011, 18 journalists have been killed in Libya alone. And today, Libya continues to have one of the world's worst press freedom records, ranked 164th out of 180 in our World Press Freedom Index. Looking more broadly, in that same 10-year period between 2011 and now, 307 journalists have been killed in conflict zones around the world. And a staggering total of 1,059 journalists have been killed in conflict zones and in countries meant to be at peace around the world over the past decade. So more than 1,000 cases, the vast majority with full or partial impunity. Keelan mentioned the statistic earlier, 9 out of 10 cases, and that is in line with our findings as well. Every time that impunity is allowed to prevail in the killing of a journalist, the door is left open for further such attacks. This makes it less safe for journalists to do their jobs around the world. So when we come together in campaigns for justice like this one for Anton, we are campaigning for an end to impunity for the killings of journalists everywhere and for better protections for journalists. One measure Reporters Without Borders is seeking to address this pervasive impunity is through campaigning for the establishment of a United Nations Special Representative for the Safety of Journalists. This would be a sort of protector of journalists who would focus specifically on this issue of safety and ensure meaningful, concrete UN action where existing mechanisms have consistently failed. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told RSF early in his tenure that he would establish this position, but that it would take time. Now, in the final stretch of his first term in office, we call on him to make that promise a reality and create this position without further delay to ensure meaningful action in cases like Anton's. Today, we also call on all of the states involved to take concrete action to ensure the Libyan authorities are finally held to account all these years later. Austria and South Africa must act to address this atrocity against one of their own citizens, and the UK must do its part too to support this UK-based family. We will continue working with Anton's family, with Doughty Street Chambers, and with hopefully many of you who will join the campaign now today to hold these states to account, as well as the various UN mechanisms that have now been triggered.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. I mean, what as all of you who are listening can hear is that there is international law. These are crimes that have been committed, and yet the international mechanisms are failing. The UN's wheels grind slow, but they're grinding mighty slow when it comes to the deaths of journalists. And it's just not good enough. And one of the things that we have to do is to be really insistent about the law becoming a reality. It's not good enough to have all manner of conventions and declarations in relation to rights, and for there to be no remedies connected to them and no proper investigations. One of the things that there's a high-level legal panel associated with the Global Media Freedom Project that I've referred to. And one of the things that we're calling for is the creation of an independent investigative task force for investigations where nations don't investigate, that then this independent task force comes into operation, and that it has, judges of a high level and investigators, and that it's resourced to actually investigate deaths exactly like the ones that we've heard about today, but most, about what happened to Anton, so that they can be properly investigated, and that you do have a resource, and that consulates are available, and that nation states do see it as their responsibility, as well as host states, to actually act on behalf of their citizens when desperate things happen. So I'm now going to turn. There was a question being asked, and it came from Nicola Spur, who I think is known to Rebecca, and Rebecca's worked with her at some point around these issues concerning dangers to journalists. But Nicola Spur is asking, what can South Africa do? Here is a man who's both South African and Austrian. What can his nations do on his behalf? Penny, what's the answer to that?
Well, I'd like to suggest that we've had no action for 10 years, and this is Anton Hammerl, a South African citizen. There's been change in administrations in South Africa and certainly in Libya. I think South Africa does have the resource to actually throw its weight behind and level of some inquiry, and I think they really should commit the time and become committed towards an effort in which they orchestrate in leading some sort of inquiry and a full investigation and hold Libya to account. I think that's really important. Anton was South African. There needs to be some level of inquiry that really comes from South Africa and them putting their weight behind this. I think that's absolutely crucial for us.
Rebecca,
Can I just add?
Is there anything that Rebecca would like to say? Because Rebecca knows Nicola Spur.
Oh, no, I just had mentioned that Nicola and I had worked together, I think at Article 19 years ago. It's really nice to see her here today and everybody else. And I think South Africa certainly has a role to play here in not just in terms of their involvement in the past and answering some of these questions and behaving more responsibly towards Penny in particular, but in leading by example. If South Africa, if Austria, if these states are really going to to do what to live up to what they say in terms of media freedom, which they are committed to, which they have as states at the national level taken other positions on, they have to address this in the first instance when it affects one of their own nationals. So sorry, I know Keelan wanted to come in.
I'm so sorry, I'm displaying terrible Zoom etiquette there. I'm so sorry, I inadvertently spoke over people. Just to add to what Penny and Rebecca have said, first of all, I understand that Nicola was very supportive of the family in 2011 when Anton was believed to be missing, and then when he was known to have been murdered. So Nicola, thank you very much, and thanks for joining us today. I agree entirely with what's been said about South Africa needing to step up to the plate and support the family's request for an investigation. And the bottom line is what we're dealing with here are grave international crimes, and perpetrators of serious international crimes like these are emboldened when they believe they simply won't face justice. And it's imperative that South Africa and other governments, the UK, where Anton was resident and where his family live, Austria, his other state of citizenship, the European Union, and all other states, particularly those within the Media Freedom Coalition, that they follow through by saying this is not good enough, there's got to be an investigation. But also a very practical ask. The South African authorities were in communication over a period of time with the Libyan officials. So during the 44 days when James Foley was missing and when it was believed Anton was also with him, there were multiple communications and there were multiple communications in the period after 2011. So a very practical thing. There is a Freedom of Information request coming your way. Give us the documents as quickly as you can so that we can get on with looking at the material that is available. And we shouldn't have to be doing an investigation with the bereaved family and as the lawyers. But in the absence of an existing investigation, that's what we need to do. And to take that step, we need the documents. So very practical question. Answer the FOI request as quickly as possible.
Penny, I want you to know you couldn't be in better hands. Keelan Gallagher and Tatiana and Catherine are a formidable team. And I can tell you that there's going to be no stone left unturned, and they really will go after the Libyan government and seek justice for you with real. I wanted to just say that Ed Davey, who's the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party and who I think is Penny's Member of Parliament, has sent a video in. He wanted to be part of this discussion, but hasn't been able to do that today. But he sent a video, and I understand Ray has it lined up, and I'm going to call upon her to play it. Here it is.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this evening's event, albeit by video link. Wanted to show my support to Penny and Anton's whole family and his friends on this, the 10th anniversary of his killing. Played a very small part working with Penny, trying to get the FCO's Benghazi desk to help. And on the 10th anniversary, when there's been no investigation or inquiry into Anton's death, I'm pleased you're having this evening's meeting. The role journalists play reporting on important events around the world is absolutely crucial. It's essential that they're able to do this without fear of capture. If we're going to have a world where human rights are upheld, the rule of law, democracy, the role of the press play in exposing how some politicians and leaders behave is absolutely crucial. And so it's the job of all of us to recognize and celebrate the work that some of our really brave journalists do. And when something goes so tragically wrong, to speak up for them. So I do want to support Anton's memory, and I want to support Penny. and want to say that as the local MP, local constituency MP, I hope there's a feeling that Anton and Penny and his family are part of the Surbiton family, the South West London family, the London family, as we work together to try to get a world where this sort of thing doesn't happen and where journalists can do their amazing work without fear of capture and killing. So I hope you have a successful evening. Again, thank you for inviting me.
Well, it just shows you that even when you've got a very experienced parliamentarian on your side and so on, rattling enough cages to get swift action is so hard. And I think that's been the experience of so many. A question was asked, and I think it's been answered by Keelan about South Africa and the early days when you, Penny, when Anton, you didn't know the full circumstances and you thought he was still alive and so forth. The question about that was put in by Monica Swalman, and it's right to say that Monica's the widow of a great South African photojournalist who was the mentor to Anton and who himself died in that period of transition to democracy for South Africa. Too many journalists pay this price, and it really is a shocking thing in our world because it's been accelerating in recent years. Instead of it being a rare occurrence, it's becoming much more commonplace. And the other commonplace is the throwing of journalists into prison, trumping up charges against journalists, alleging that they are themselves supporting terrorism in some way, or that they themselves are overcritical of government and all manner of conspiracies. And so the risks that journalists are now running is greater than perhaps would have been the case, say, 20 years ago. There's something in the air which is about diminishing the respect that we have and the protections that we think should exist for those who are bringing us the truth about what's happening in our world. I just wanted to see, would any of the other lawyers who are present, I know that Catherine and Tatiana are here, and Bronwyn Friedlander, would anyone else like to contribute to this discussion? I've been looking at the questions, but they're not coming in fast and furiously, but there's so much to cover here, as I know from the work that we're doing on media freedom inside the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute. Jeremy Bliss is here asking, Penny and your supporters, the family of Chris Allen stand with you at this time and in your campaign for justice. Fighting to patch together justice for our family members is so important to try to create pathways for those in the future. A very hard choice to go public again, but brave and important. And thank you, Jeremy, because we know that you too know how painful this is. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the business of campaigning, and Rebecca, you may be able to come in on this too. There are all these deaths that I've been talking about, and then the horror of the individuals who suffer close up, Penny and Diane. We are calling for much greater and much more proactivity by consular services of our embassies in countries where these things happen, because in many ways we've sort of seen that it's not fulfilling the functions that families would want. Is that an experience that Journalists Sans Frontières have too? Because we're calling for a strengthening of consular services and much more availability of consular services to the families and to journalists themselves. We're also calling for a special visa to be created, and we want countries around the world to create a sort of component, a number of visas that are readily available at short notice to get journalists out of places where they may feel that they're at risk. And we, of course, are encouraging the use of targeted sanctions against nations and the powerful in nations who allow these terrible things to happen and who do limit media freedom. But what are the other things that you at your organization are calling for?
Thanks, Helena. And certainly we support all of the recommendations of that excellent report of the high-level panel. And in fact, the other reports too, there were a series on related issues. And there is certainly advocacy needed around implementation of those really important recommendations. I also note that the high-level panel was kind enough to also support RSF's call for a UN special representative. We see these as very complementary measures in getting at impunity. In the first instance, I think accountability is certainly with the states involved. And so we look for ways to ensure that. And in our campaigning, advocacy is an important element. And by advocacy, I mean the dialogue, the engagement directly with policymakers, whether it's bilateral states or these international institutions, to try to implement change. That is oftentimes more effective, the greater light is shed on these cases. So public mobilization, media attention, all of these things help states to take us more seriously as campaigners when we are trying to achieve objectives in specific cases. But things have also been too stagnant for too long. And, I mentioned the statistics earlier, how horrific this is. Over 1,000 journalists killed over the past decade, mostly with impunity. At Reporters Without Borders, we're also looking now for more creative means of getting at accountability when justice within a country context has not been possible. We are increasingly turning to methods like supporting the call for targeted human rights sanctions. And by targeted, I mean sanctions against specific individuals who are involved in gross and systematic human rights violations. And also looking at other means of criminal liability through strategic litigation. I'll mention as an example, a court case we filed in Germany about a month ago, taking Mohammed bin Salman and 4 other senior Saudi officials to court there for crimes against humanity in their widespread and systematic persecution of journalists through the murder of Jamal Khashoggi and arbitrary detention of 34 others. And so we're trying to find new ways of achieving accountability. Ultimately, we hope to achieve justice where justice should be served in the first instance, but there are other things that can be done. And one message I would say to anybody who thinks that they can get away with such a crime is that, civil society is getting more creative, we're getting more adaptive, and we will find ways to achieve accountability, even if our systems are failing. And it is really thanks to the courage of individual families who are willing to speak up, who are willing to partner with organizations like ours, that can make this more effective, because we need to highlight specific cases. And we hope that we can get justice and answers for specific individuals like Anton, but in doing so, chip away at this broader climate of pervasive impunity and start to create better proactive protections. Because every time we see any steps towards justice concretely, it does make things a little bit safer for everyone who follows.
Diane, I'm going to come back to you, because you've set up your foundation in the name of your son, James Foley, but it's a legacy foundation, hoping that some of the lessons will be learned and that there will be support and justice for the many, not just in your own particular case. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, what is your direct advice to Penny at this stage? How can Penny get this campaign for justice to reach the ears that matter and to be effective? What would your recommendation to her be?
Oh, that's, I felt that one needs to make noise. One needs to, I've had to pray for the courage to be public, to express my outrage, at being misled in our own situation. Otherwise, people don't know. And it obviously takes a community, though. As Penny mentioned, all of you journalists or diplomats, government people, all of you, we need to work together to right these wrongs, because it's too easy to just brush them aside, forget them, and move on. And unless we fight to be heard and to express our outrage, at this incredible impunity, it will continue. And as others have said, perpetrators become more emboldened and feel that there's no end to what they can do to silence voices and photographs such as Anton. So it's just a very dark campaign of silencing that needs to be shed light on. And that is what you are all doing today by attending, by speaking out. So I'm just so incredibly grateful, and I will continue to pray for Penny, for her to have the courage to continue to speak out, because the world needs to hear you, Penny.
Now, I am going to, first of all, before I ask Penny to close this meeting, I'm going to give you directions about what you can all do. I want you to memorize hashtag Justice for Anton. You really have to have that in mind, hashtag Justice for Anton. And I want you to tell his story. You know, when you sit around now, here in Britain, we're just coming out of lockdown. We're allowed to sit down with 6 other people, and today tell them Anton's story. Tell them about what's happening in our world and how justice is so hard to secure. And tell people what Penny and her family are suffering, what the Foleys have suffered, what families suffer when this happens to journalists. Justice for Anton, hashtag Justice for Anton. I want you to follow the campaign on social media, on Twitter and on Facebook, and to see the new website. And Ray, who is the wonderful Raimonda who works with us here at Doughty Street, has put it on the side in the chat. Now, I want, if you can, support the campaign financially, because you know, you'll see that there is a crowdfunder to raise funds to fight this legal battle, and we need your help. We really do. And these are lawyers who are really, you know, that they don't ask for much, but you do need, if you're going after freedom of information applications, if you're doing all these things, that you really do need to be supporters. And so please look at the crowdfunder and contribute to that. And again, Ray's putting up the link. Penny is there, and she has asked if you would consider flagging that the legal team are working at really reduced rates, and they are. And this is such an important case. And they've got an experienced team of lawyers who've agreed to do it in a special way. So they're doing it at very little cost, but please help. Now, I'm just reminding you that the applications to courts and things actually don't come free of charge. And so you have expenses attached to them. And then, of course, there are travel issues and so on too, if we get this before a court. If you have information which can help, and sometimes you will, especially if you're journalists or if you're people who have links to Libya and so on, please let us know, because we need that information, and reach out to the campaign with any information you have. Now, the thing that I really want to stress is that on Monday, this is next Monday, Easter Monday, the 5th of April, it's the actual 10th anniversary of Anton's death. And that day, the family are asking you to consider responding, respecting and having a minute's silence. It's going to be at midday. That's 1 p.m. South African time, midday here in Britain, 1 p.m. CET, 7 a.m. And for those of you who are in New York, it'll be 7 o'clock in the morning, and all on the East Coast, Washington and Boston and places. So, and of course, New Hampshire, where Diane is. And if you could put that out on your own social networks, that would be great. So that's Monday, the 5th of April, midday here, 7 o'clock East Coast of the United States, and work out the other times, because I'm sure you're familiar with how to do it. 1 o'clock in South Africa. Now, I know that there are a number of my colleagues here from the International Bar Association too, who've tuned in, and the Human Rights Institute, and remember that the IBA is working on this, on media freedom, on a project too, as you heard from Rebecca, Journalists Sans Frontières. We need all your support. We want you to read the information, and you can support by knowing. Knowledge helps you to become powerful. And so when you're asking for things, you want there to be proper investigations. You want there to be responses. You want consular services, and you want visas to get people out of dangerous places when they realize that they're in danger. And we need our governments to be doing those things, and all of us have a voice. I want to thank you. Penny, do you want to say a final thing?
Yeah, well, just thank you so much to all of the panelists. You've been amazing and absolutely sterling in putting across the important things so eloquently, so comprehensively, and speaking in a language that we all understand across all of the jurisdictions and the far-flung regions everyone's come from to join in on this. Thank you for your effort. Thank you to everyone that's supporting us, that has supported us over these last 10 years. I can't emphasize enough, you're our community. We've relied on you to keep us going these last 10 years, and you have. Some of you I haven't spoken to in ages, and yet I pick up the phone and it's as if we've never stopped talking. And I'm so grateful to you. You know who you are, especially in the journalist community. I'm so proud to be a journalist because of people like you. You've been amazing. You've emboldened us to step out. And I just want to say, please continue to stand with us. Please continue to reach out. And like Diane said, share what you can about our messaging. Join us in showing public outrage. I think that's important. It does take courage. It does take guts to step out and speak about some of these things. It's not easy to be quite so public about such personal things, but it's not personal. It's happened to so many before us. It's going to happen again. It needs to stop, and you can help do this. So, throw your weight behind our campaigning. Look at the social media platforms, look at the messaging, look at the Justice for Anton website. There is one that's gone live today. And just keep alongside us and just join us at every stage. Thank you so much once again.
And today's webinar was in memory of two great journalists, and the campaign for Anton goes on. And I want to thank everybody who came and joined the webinar today as participants at a distance. But we really have to make the change. Thank you all. Thank you to my panelists, every one of you. Thank you. And Penny, we salute you.